April Fool's Day 2017 came and went, and in a stroke of genius, the Rick and Morty team reverse-trolled the entire internet by releasing the long-awaited first episode of the third season. The fanbase has been essentially rabid with anticipation over the eventual nature of Rick's escape, and after a year and a half of rampant fanbase-wide speculation, I was growing concerned that whatever escape method they chose wouldn't be able to match up to the hype. But spoiler alert, stop watching right now if you haven't seen it yet. As much as we all wanted Butter-Passing Robot to somehow save Rick, I think we can all agree that Rick escaped in the most Rick way possible. Which is to say that he was never truly out of control of the situation to begin with and planned it all from the start. And in a single 20-minute episode, he goes from being in the lowest possible position a viewer can imagine him in, being completely at the hands of his enemies, straight into toppling the two most titanically powerful organizations in the show canon. Remember how Rick and all of his war buddies used to be in this massive battle against the Galactic Federation? A battle that it seems they lost? And remember how Eye Patch Rick tried to take on the Council of Ricks? And lost? This one Rick, the Rickest Rick, took down all of them. At once. It wasn't even close either. He flawlessly predicted and manipulated all of the other Rick's actions, without any of them having any idea what he was going to do. As a fan who's constantly blown away by the immense attention to detail put in every single scene of this show, I found myself scrutinizing every shot for information. There is so much to unpack about this episode. The most immediate one on everyone's minds is the origin story of the portal gun. This scene is framed brilliantly, because it proposes some heartbreaking facts that describe how the Rickest Rick became who he is, and then immediately afterwards leaves the door open for the whole thing to have been a fabrication. The story makes complete sense, but we as viewers have no idea what details were real and what were false, and what we saw created just as many questions as it answered. A deft writer understands that this is how you create fascination. Any of the events that Rick showed us could turn out being fabricated. We as viewers are left to speculate on how much Rick showed us was actually canon, so let's speculate. This story, if true, shows us why this particular Rick is the Rickest Rick. When another Rick offers him the status of a demigod through the invention of a portal gun, this is the Rick that turns down that opportunity. He says it sounds boring. He says it sounds lonely. And then we see that this Rick is actually in a loving, passionate relationship with a wife and a daughter. He turns down the invention of interdimensional travel because he loves his life and he loves his family. And that's what makes him, quote-unquote, a different kind of Rick. Then a completely unexplained and mysterious bomb gets dropped through a Rick-made portal, assassinating his wife and his daughter. I think it's a crucial detail that in this story it also shows that Beth dies in the explosion. Earlier on, when Rick and the Gromflemite were in the Shonies, they look outside and see the representation of that devastating memory, and it is his wife and his daughter both standing in front of the portal. If this is C-137 Rick's actual backstory, Beth died as a child, and Morty was never born. This would show that Rick has jumped universes at least once and possibly many times before the show even started. There have been theories about this since the show first released, since Beth mentions that Rick has been gone for 20 years, but somehow Rick still has memories of Morty as a baby. Season 1, Episode 1 begins in what would become the Cronenberg universe. When Beth says all the way back then that Rick left her, it might have been that the Rick from that universe just hopped to a different one for whatever reason, leading to C-137 Rick taking his place 20 years later. All of this begs the question of why that bomb had to drop through the portal to begin with. That is definitely an interdimensional Rick portal, which means that whoever dropped the bomb had to have access to Rick-based technology. But what's perhaps more perplexing is why anybody would want to assassinate this particular Rick to begin with, since he hasn't ever even left his universe. We have absolutely no further information on this, so speculations can range as far as saying that it's some sort of time traveler who wants to kill the Rickest Rick before he becomes what he is. We all know that the box labeled time traveling stuff on Rick's shelf is a nod to the writers not wanting to mess with time travel as a story element, but it doubles as canon that Rick has at least messed with time travel before. Regardless, it's easy to discard these scenes as a complete fabrication, as Rick claims, but if what we're to gather from them is that what separates the Rickest Rick is his passion for protecting those close to him. Then this point is brought up again later in the very same episode. During the hostage standoff, the leader of the Council of Ricks uses Summer as leverage, claiming that Rick won't shoot her because he is irrational and passionate, and that's what makes him different from all the other Ricks. This is corroborated in earlier episodes, specifically the one with the evil Rick, when he sees the Rickest Rick crying over his Morty. Evil Rick emphasizes that Ricks do not care about Mortys, essentially highlighting that what makes the Rickest Rick unique is that he does care. He is the Rick that would turn down his pursuits of science if it meant being with his loved ones, which perfectly matches this quote-unquote fabricated backstory. Outside of this potentially groundbreaking backstory, this episode is packed with an absurd amount of tiny details. Notable mentions include the following: a framed picture of Doofus Rick in Jerry's garage, 2 background Mortys resembling Mabel and Dipper from Gravity Falls, Mork, Ricky, and of course everyone's favorite adult arcade Schlongbirds. Is that K-Michael? That doesn't look like any of the 2 previous outfits that we've seen K-Michael wear, and is specifically missing the 2 pairs of orange pipes leading to his head, so I'm assuming that's not him. Another funny bit that somebody pointed out on Reddit is that when Rick was about to hop mines to the Gronflemite, he said that the Gronflemite's brain did not have enough room for all of Rick, so he'll leave behind 6 years of improvisational classes and also his fear of wicker furniture? So I mean, from here on out, as long as we see Rick not be afraid of wicker furniture, then continuity is preserved, I guess. And then, amidst all of Rick's brain hopping to try to take over people, he constantly uses the excuse that he has to go take a shit in order to leave the room, which seems like a not very well improvised excuse. It's also notable that since Rick switched bodies multiple times during this episode, it's possible that other Ricks will not be able to identify him as C-137 anymore, which could be why he feels safe toppling the entire Rick government without fear that they'll come hunt him down. I also love that Jerry's total incompetence at everything makes him the perfect candidate for endless promotions in the highly bureaucratic bug world. I also love that whenever the Rickest Rick jumps bodies in this episode, we can tell which one he is by the instantly appearing drool on his face. But the biggest thing that stood out to me about this entire episode is the long speech at the end that's clearly meant to mirror episode 1 of season 1. In a Reddit post that I have linked in the description, a fan pointed out that in an interview, the creators said that there was a secret that they decided they would never tell the fans about Rick, but they were stunned to see that very soon after the episode started airing, somebody made a Reddit post that nailed it exactly. We can look back at Reddit posts that happened around the time discussed and try to figure out which one was the correct theory. There are a couple of candidates here, but my favorite was the one where Rick knows that he's the main character of a TV show. Evidence to support this theory can be found throughout the show, as Rick commonly breaks the fourth wall. He also fairly commonly makes references to real-world subjects that the other characters in the show don't really understand. This theory has functioned as my headcanon for some time, and it seemed to be referenced directly in the outro of the final episode of Season 2, as we see Mr. Poopy Butthole watching the same episode that we just watched. Rick loves to come up with his own catchphrases and references the playing of credits and the playing of commercials multiple times throughout the series. The chilling and hilarious outro speech at the end of the Season 3 premiere confirms all of this for me. Rick claims that he planned his jailbreak from the moment he turned himself in an attempt to get rid of both the galactic government and Morty's dad, because Jerry betrayed him. As soon as Morty responds by saying that that's pretty dark, he becomes a stand-in for the audience. Rick is no longer talking to Morty. He's talking to you, the viewer. Let's see what Rick has to say to you.
And I'll go out and I'll find some more of that Mulan Szechuan teriyaki dipping sauce, Morty. Because that's what this is all about, Morty. That's my one-armed man. I'm not driven by avenging my dead family, Morty. That was fake. I'm driven by finding that McNugget sauce. I want that Mulan McNugget sauce, Morty.
Let me interrupt here to remind you that Morty didn't see that quote-unquote fabricated backstory. He has no idea what Rick is talking about right now and can't. Morty didn't see the fabricated backstory. He didn't see the Szechuan sauce. We did. There's no way that those remarks could be addressed at Morty. They're addressed to you.
That's That's my series arc, Morty.
hell?
If it takes 9 seasons, I want my McNugget dipping sauce,
about,
Szechuan
Rick?
sauce, Morty. That's what's gonna take
What are
us
you
all the way to
talking
the
about?
end, Morty. Season 9 more seasons, Morty.
Sure, it might be a total obliteration of the fourth wall, but it's also things that he canonically said. I mean, unless April Fools and we never left the Shonies to begin with. But let's not go down that rabbit hole just yet.